Everyone, welcome to another episode of Dynasty Underdog. I'm your host, Uri Dawkins. With me tonight, Billy Beeman and Jake Kornblum. I call him Jake Abrams. How's it going, guys?
Oh man, it's going. I'm still recovering from whatever I caught from my daughter, so I might need y'all to carry the show a little bit, but excited to be here as always. And just noticed that we're not streaming on X any longer, or Twitter, as I'll keep calling it, because I guess they require a premium account. So catch us on YouTube.
Later.
That's hilarious. I just noticed this up in the top right. So
Damn you,
yeah,
Elon.
later. I can only afford one premium account. I'm sorry.
Yeah, totally reasonable. I get it.
Put that on the company at some point, I guess.
Yeah, we'll expense that.
All right, so news and nonsense, we actually have some, which is kind of cool. Actually, teams are getting back to work like today, this week. So we should be having more actual NFL news going forward until we start actually watching real live football. It's kind of
actual news. Yeah, actual news.
Yes.
Keon Coleman made a cut.
Yeah, one-handed catch. But Brendan Ayuk officially, I mean, I don't even know if this is really news. Like, we kind of just assumed something like this was going on there. But he officially requested trade. I think they put a first-round tender on him. And I believe Billy wants to go back and talk about our buy low conversation on Pearsall last week. But with the other news, Pearsall is going to be placed on the non-football injury IR. So, I mean, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. Like, he could still probably start. I believe that means he could start practicing next week if he really wanted to, right? I don't think there's a time limit on it. Is that correct?
No, they can take him off whenever. They can take him off whenever, I think. But it's just an avalanche of news, like coming from the 49ers camp, I guess. Just, with Ayuk moving out of there and talking about buying low, or if it was a buy low period, which I kind of think we ended up, concluding it wasn't. I just wonder if with this, I mean, looking at it now, his value could potentially go up pretty quickly, right? Like even from where it was. So it's interesting that we concluded there, but it could have been kind of a buy low period. Even with this NFI news, like I don't even think it really matters, right?
No, I don't think it matters at all, personally.
No, I think I still think he's one of those guys you want to. Jesus Christ.
Brandon Ayuk, are you a Las Vegas Raider? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. As much as you'd like that, Ben, you can keep dreaming.
I feel bad you guys are boy Jacob Cowing. Why not him?
Okay.
He's blown up on Twitter quite a lot, actually, since this morning. Yeah. I think that's the most logical next step. It's better than people going Jawan Jennings. So yeah. I'm happy to see that conversation not going down the wrong path. But yeah, I think Jacob Cowing definitely has a role potentially for himself if this is kind of the direction that the 49ers are forced to go. It's one of those really unique situations where do they have to really do anything, or do they just really kind of force Brandon Ayuk's hand and force him to play, or else he finds himself in a Le'Veon situation? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of like the idea, though, of instead of fighting over Ricky Pearsall with your league mates in whatever form or fashion, you can just go ahead and acquire the guy that nobody's talking about in Jacob Cowing, who we like quite a bit, like very talented player. They clearly like him enough to add him to the team, and he's been looking pretty good from what we've been seeing. So yeah, I actually like that idea, kind of going that direction. I mean, do you think it's a time to sell Ricky Pearsall off of kind of this news? Like we were already talking that he's probably not a buy low, right? So I guess this would be, like I said, even with the NFI news, it seems like people are already starting to take their victory laps on Twitter, right? I think I saw Jagger coming out saying how hard it was for him to like contain himself, and there's a lot of people who are getting really excited about this now. So it may be a time to attack that, send him out to, I don't know, I'm trying to think, because if you put him on the trade block, people might think, like we've talked about, that he's not as valuable. You might just want to go and try to offer him up for some of those veteran players that are kind of around or above him. Yep. In that ADP range is probably an easy way to do it.
Yeah, I'd probably even reach a little bit in terms of what that value looks like, knowing that it's going to potentially continue to to move in that trajectory. These types of situations don't get resolved immediately. Sometimes they have. I remember the AJ Brown one earlier in the offseason. Like, he ended up getting a new contract basically like 2 weeks later. But the market changes that frequently that you could probably take advantage of this in the interim.
Cool.
All right. Jordan Addison, DUI. So this is idiot.
Not good.
This is So this is the second time he's gotten in trouble for motor vehicle stuff. If you guys remember, I think the first one he was saying he was rushing his doggy to the vet, which like we could all I get
that's a hella good excuse.
Anything from a
he was
puppy.
in his bag.
Fucking dog wasn't there this time. Okay, so
he was also driving like 140 miles per hour in like a school zone.
Yeah, it's terrible. It just shows like very bad decision making, character issues, stuff like that. Like, I don't know, man. I don't think he's that good to be talent.
You're not good enough to be doing this kind of shit.
Well, that's it. That's the thing. I mean, the talent situation and all that stuff. Like, just matters. Like, if you're like really good at what you do, like you will get pass after pass after pass after pass all the time because NFL don't give a shit, right? But he's not like that. Like, he's not that good that he could keep doing this. So I'm completely out on the guy. I don't like it.
Oh wow.
Oh, okay.
He went. Okay, so he went on the. So I mean, consider this. Consider this. He went on. So I mean, all right. So just start here. He went on the block in one of our leagues. Like, immediately, somebody was like, they even said it. They're like, this guy's a bad character or whatever. I want him off my team, essentially. So I sent Marshawn Lloyd and a third, I think, right? And there. So would you take that, Uriah? Are you that out, or would you play the market still?
Well, yeah. I mean, value still matters, but I would sell him for less than probably market, but not like that.
Okay, like Marshawn Lloyd in the second.
I might just go ahead and do that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's fair. Like, it's definitely bad decision making. Like, he could have been a rogue situation, right? Like, it's super easy for this to have been like really, really bad, especially considering it was like in a school zone, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, too many times
all it takes is one more time for it not to go really well for him.
It does. I think I was reading. I forgot what that guy's name is who does the threads for the legal threads for Dynasty.
Drew Davenport.
Yeah, Drew Davenport. Yeah, I was reading his thing, and at the conclusion of it, I think there's probably going to be some suspension here. It's going to be probably short term. So you're going to have to deal with that one way or another. But too many times I feel like I've seen these situations turn out to be, the Tyreek Hill, where you're getting a guy for like a third round pick and he ends up, bouncing back. And so it's really hard for me not to kind of lean into that narrative and just try to go buy him low all over the place. As bad as kind of the decision making is, and as bad as that looks for his character, really young guy, could see my friends doing this kind of stuff at that age. And that's not an excuse necessarily, but still, these guys can turn it around. And I don't know. I would look at it like that, I guess.
All right.
How about you, Jake? Oh, sorry, I don't know.
No, that's I was trying to sell low before this happened. To be honest, I'm completely understanding of where you're coming from, Billy. I just don't necessarily. Well, now as someone who does happen to have a couple of shares, I'm probably stuck with him. Like, it's very much the Rashee Rice situation of 2 months ago, right? So.
Right.
You kind of just have to sit through it. Or if you're one of those people who truly believes in like bad apples or bad eggs, like, this is a time to potentially lose a ton of value on a player and get him off your roster just to do that. I personally don't believe in that. I'd rather watch and see what the suspension looks like, see how they react to it, see what the communication looks like. Obviously the mimosa shot like the day after, not great either.
Yeah, I saw that. The Instagram photo.
Yeah, the Instagram story of him drinking a mimosa like 24 hours after being arrested. Not amazing. But with that being said, if I could still probably get what KTC has him at a 26 first, I'm probably getting out. That's what I was really trying to get for him already, was a 25 first. I think I was giving up like Addison plus like a fourth for a Brian Thomas Jr., Lad McConkey range type thing, just to kind of churn that roster a little bit. But you know, that's kind of where I sit. And I don't really believe in the talent all that much. We've talked a lot about his profile. Isn't particularly physical off the line, huge detriment to him. Even when he's in the slot, it's usually a huge issue. Doesn't have necessarily great lateral speed, especially coming off without motion. So it's really difficult for me to see like a super consistent role where he's looking at, I don't know, top 25, top 30 receiver in the NFL. He probably just kind of hovers right outside of that range. So why the fuck do I want him on my team if that's what his ceiling is? I don't know. That's kind of the way I look at it.
That's fair.
It's fair.
Right. I probably won't get what I want now because I just said that. But to whoever's not listening, please buy
just
him.
Send the trade offers before the pod drops. Yeah.
This is live, Uriah.
You'd probably be better off searching for multiple seconds, to be honest with you, if you really want to get off of him. And you're desperate, because I don't know if the first is coming in the calendar year, to be honest with you, unless he's absolutely balling in the season. And if he's doing that, then you might reconsider you might reconsider what you're trying to do. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
totally.
Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, all right, we can move on.
All right. Does Jaden Daniels' board work in the Hard Knocks episode were you? They were drawing up plays and it was for the Giants, right?
Yeah, it was Brian Dable.
Yeah. So and they're asking him, hey, what would you do in this situation? And his answer was just simply, just throw a touchdown. Like I like the answer. Like, I'm just going to throw a touchdown. So I think that's what Mahomes does. So I'm just going to throw it. I'm just going to score it. But like, you kind of want to see a little bit like higher IQ response. But it doesn't worry me. Like I still think that Jaden Daniels is pretty raw. So he'll get there, hopefully.
I think it highlighted, honestly, a lot of what made him so successful in LSU, to be honest. He had a lot of trust in his wide receivers between Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors. I think there's a lot of there's like a big deficit the way that I see when players are like kind of over-reliant on the physical characteristics of their wide receivers. And that's kind of how I saw that. But what I will say, like anyone should know, these shows are edited. They're not unedited. There's a very good chance that there was additional context that was provided by Jaden Daniels that was stated, that was cut out and edited. So I think it's just, from surface level, that's how I took it, was that, okay, he relies too much on his wide receivers. But yeah, that's how I saw it. What about you, Billy?
Yeah, I agree with you there. It could have totally been cut up. So, I mean, I don't put too much stock into that if I'm going to get a discount on Jaden Daniels because of this clip from Hard Knocks, please, come my way. I'll definitely be buying. And I think that's possible. Like a lot of people did see this and were turned off by it, but also the play that they put up there, if I remember correctly, I think it was, against cover one, and there's the slot fade there. And that's literally like what he lived on at LSU. That was his bread and butter. And so he was throwing a touchdown on that play at LSU, especially with the way that they kind of set that up. So I don't know if it was even as bad as people want to make it seem. And there probably was additional context, like Jake's saying, that went along with that. I doubt that that's kind of just where they ended it. They're like, yeah, perfect. That works. Like this all works.
He dabbed him and it was just like, all right, we're good.
He's like, yeah, that's right. Touchdown. Yeah. So, but I mean, look, we can lead right out of that talking about the Giants and Dable right into Daniel Jones and his dynasty value. I was looking at this and I was wondering if, in our market, they came out that his rehab's going well. He's running, cutting, doing all that stuff. And there really isn't much else there. I mean, unless you're a Drew Lock stan. Is Daniel Jones undervalued? Like, this guy is sitting between Tony Pollard and a 2024 second on KTC. Like, that seems low.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, I don't love Daniel Jones, even though my tag here says that I'm a Daniel Jones apologist. I just don't see why you wouldn't want to acquire a starting quarterback in the NFL at that price point. Like, Will Levis is going for that as well. I don't love Will Levis. I'll acquire him if I can at that like early second range. It isn't even necessarily about the talent anymore. It's just about the opportunity. And we saw it with fucking Jake Browning, who we knew that the opportunity wasn't there. We saw him last year going for seconds to some teams because that's how desperate people are for quarterbacks potentially at the end of the season. So the way that I see it is just like he has his contract. Realistically, the Giants can opt out basically at the end of this upcoming season. So it doesn't really mean all that much in terms of a starting job for him. But there was a lot of there has been video footage of him at like a QB camp. And I will say that like he generally looks significantly more alert than he ever has. He's kind of a doofy dude. No offense to him. Doesn't really lack a lot of that athleticism, or he doesn't really have a lot of that athleticism that you really look for in a modern quarterback. He looks significantly better. And I think if anything, that maybe some of these conversations that have happened around the NFL draft have kind of lit a fire under his ass and have kind of put him in a situation where he knows that he now has to kind of fight for the rest of that contract if he wants to get paid. Otherwise, he's going to get cut and probably get signed to like a $7-10 million deal per year. And it's like,
that's
not what you want.
Maybe
exactly.
Potential starter. Yeah. No, that's, I think you broke it down really well. And just the way I think of it is, if you're a team that is, has one strong quarterback and maybe like Russell Wilson or something, like this is a great way as a contender to kind of like fill out your QB room a little bit in a very cheap way. You know what I mean? And somebody who has Daniel Jones, if they're not competitive or if they're middling, they're probably going to take something like this and just be like, I'm willing to get off, because there is that risk of him, just like Jake said, getting cut, and it's whatever. And that's baked into the price, though. I think you're getting a starting quarterback at the beginning of this year with some new weapons for less than a first. And as Uriah always says, a starting quarterback in the NFL should probably be worth a first round pick. Obviously context goes along with that, but I think this kind of fits really well with that in terms of you being able to get, some points on your team for cheap. I like it. And he has that rushing upside potential. Like obviously he's coming off of an injury and that's going to be, lessened, but he is a quarterback where that is part of his game. And so, for fantasy, it works.
All right. So we have a couple segments here that kind of go hand in hand, kind of reminiscent of what a lot of us probably did with last year. And so we want to look at some players that maybe are we out too early? Maybe some players that we don't want to do the Mike Evans thing too that we did last year. So basically old players that we think we should be out on, but possibly maybe there's still a couple there that if we were to be getting out of them now, might be a little too soon. So let's start off. DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley. I mean, D-Hop is what, 31? 32, right. Something like that. And I know there's a huge handful of people that probably already got off him for this reason 2 years ago and are probably regretting it, because he's had, when he's out there and he's playing, he's producing. He always has. But do you think that next year is the time to do it?
I mean, I guess price always is like really important in these conversations, right? Because sure. Like that's kind of going to dictate whether we think like it's time to get in or out, because it's not always just the age. Like he's 32 years old, and he's sitting between guys like Demario Douglas, Raheem Mostert, Josh Palmer, and he has a guy Will Levis there, who we know he's been successful with in short spurts. So it does. I mean, I don't know. He's a really tough case of this to kind of dissect whether it's a year early or too late. But his price feels like we might be a little too early on maybe how much we're out on him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm sending Josh Palmer right now for DeAndre Hopkins. I don't give two shits what anyone says. Like,
what if you had to attach like a third to it?
Probably would still do it. Yeah. I'm doing this because I'm competing. So my idea is that's basically a fourth. Like that's that's an absolutely smash for me. Like if I can, I'd probably, if I was selling, I'd still probably accept like a mid to late second if I could find that. And if that's what I'm looking for, I probably have to wait till in season, unfortunately. But he just seems like way too much of a value. The same thing with Calvin Ridley. He's kind of hovering in a different value range, but still feels incredibly cheap for a 29-year-old wide receiver who realistically will be probably their true one next year going into the season.
Yeah, I mean, Calvin Ridley's 29. He's actually, it's funny, we think of him as like a young guy, but he's definitely no spring chicken. He's getting up there too. But I would agree for like a second. Like I do think this is the thing we do in Dynasty far too often is we let age impact our evaluations way more than we should. And it's just, it doesn't really make sense that both of these players would be I guess this unsuccessful this year, that they should be, valued where they're going. So it does feel like we're kind of doing the Mike Evans thing with Hopkins and Ridley. And I know that there's plenty of data to say that, post 31, like it doesn't look great for these guys. But man, yeah, that value just feels like in season. I take this risk often. Like I do feel like with these older guys, point scoring season, there's usually an out to get out of them, even when you buy them for a similar price that you bought them, if not an increased price. So yeah, I guess I do end up on that side of things. We can move on to the next one.
How do you guys feel about Tyler Lockett?
Oh yeah. Jake, you want to jump in real quick?
Sure. I personally went into the offseason not thinking too highly on Tyler Lockett. He sits around 200 on KTC right now, which is just absolutely diabolical. That means he's sitting next to Bucky Irving, Wan'Dale Robinson in early third.
That's what I was looking for. Yeah, okay.
Rashad Bateman. Like
you came prepared.
I'm taking Tyler Lockett. And the reason why I was probably out too early initially was I just didn't think that offense moving in this direction found a role for a wide receiver 3. Because I think that he truly will probably be the wide receiver 3. As much as people don't think that JSN will come into his own, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to talk about that, to be honest, because I know this group doesn't believe that. So there's no need to waste our time. But the real thing is that Brian Grubbs, is that his last name? Grubbs? One of the
I think
two.
So, yeah.
He's either really hungry or not that hungry. He ran a fantastic 3 wide receiver set and made all 3 of those dudes eat. So we're talking about Jalen Polk, Rome Odunze, and Jalen McMillan all had incredible roles in the University of Washington over the last 2 years. It wasn't just last year. Last year was probably the only year that people started to see them because, Michael Penix really was driving that offense into the NCAA college football playoffs. That's huge. Yeah. So I think for me, if I can see that there's a potential role for a wide receiver 3, then I'm fine buying anyone in that wide receiver room, especially at that cost. Like that cost says yes. What about you guys?
Yeah, this one's a little, I think I lean more, like the price is definitely like very, very palatable. So I can't argue there, but I just, in terms of like, do we actually think that it's going to be, like a year too early in terms of he's going to still produce kind of the same way he has in the past? And you're kind of talking about like a top 36 type, and on the back end of that, right? Like a wide receiver 3 type finish. And last year he was like in the 40s range. And I'm not sure he's going to really make it above that if he is going to be the wide receiver 3, on a regular basis. Like, is he going to really give us, around 12 points per game? I don't know. I guess Ryan Grubb, yeah, you're right. And it's Grubb. It's 1. He's not that hungry. I guess he is going to throw the ball more, and he does utilize, in college, at least he was utilizing, these 3 wide receiver sets pretty effectively. So it's possible, but I kind of lean towards we might just be getting out at the right time. At that price point, I'd rather just hold him though, I guess, for sure. But do I think that he's going to actually produce for us? I kind of think this might be the year that he does decline, and we might be right to kind of get out on him. But I couldn't stomach sending him away for that price, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, everything you said, I pretty much agree with. Like, I think he's probably one of the best. Like, if I received an offer for other players, and someone threw in Tyler Lockett as an extra player, as we tend to do, he would be one of the better throw-ins. To get me to accept some trade.
That's an awesome point. He's this year's Adam Thielen, basically.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, it's good enough. Like, you're not going to rush out to get rid of him, but or even acquire him. But I think definitely he's one of the better like throw in picks for to make your trade go through. So, how about Courtland Sutton?
It's a guy who I like never think about. Like, where the hell is? Because
he doesn't do anything.
That is terrible to say, but he's sitting at like 160s. Looking at KTC, wide receiver 61. He's 28 years old, not even as old as the guys we've been talking about here. And I guess the situation has just been so bad from a quarterback perspective. I think that's why he's been an afterthought. But for a late second, you could probably get him for some pretty good deals. Like, I don't know. I mean, we like Shaheed in the community because he's exciting, but like you could probably easily move over from him to Courtland Sutton, who profiles much more as a steady, weekly option. But damn, are we a little too early on this? It kind of feels like we're a little too early in getting out of Courtland Sutton, but I know he's like the least exciting player, right?
Least exciting player now with the least exciting quarterback. Like,
but he scored on a weekly basis better than Tyler Lockett did last year, better than Christian Kirk. You know what I mean? Like he hasn't been unproductive.
That's fair. I think that's a completely great counter argument. I also believe that the Denver Broncos had no one else on their team available to catch a football. So
they
that's
still
fine.
Have that situation kind of, right?
Yeah, but now they have no one to throw the ball. So
that's not what Sean Payton thinks.
We got Bo Nix, Troy Franklin. I don't know. He's a tough one. It's kind of like what Billy said at first when I mentioned his name. Was like, it's just a guy I don't even think about anymore. Like, I don't have any shares of him. I'm not looking to acquire anymore. But again, with Tyler Lockett, like if Sutton was added in as an extra piece, like that's a good extra piece to add into a trade. But you're not getting no like burst for him. You're not getting a high second for him. Like he's a third, right? Type of deal. So.
He's in the range right here at late second for 25 late second. Are you going to send a 25 late second for Courtland Sutton?
Probably not. But the way we're talking about him and that he's such an afterthought, I don't even know if people would consider him being that value if they had him on their team. Like, no. I think you could probably get
endowment effect
off of them for less. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Maybe I don't have any Courtland Sutton, so I don't feel any connection towards him, and that's why. Maybe if you did,
wide receiver one, bro.
Exactly. I was just gonna say. Literally, I have a wide receiver one for a team in one of the toughest divisions.
That's a first round pick right there. Give me a first round pick, please. Oh man,
Courtland Sutton for Daniel Jones. Perfect deal.
All right, I guess he's not even like valued enough to do this with.
He's boring to talk about. Let's move on. Gus Edwards. Gus the Bus. So here's the thing. Out too early. Has anybody been in on Gus the Bus? I did. I was in on Gus the Bus in like last 6 years.
This one was actually targeted right at you. You're right.
I think we're out. I think we're out just in time.
But we're out just in time. I'm interested to see what happens with him. But again, he's just like a nice little throw-in piece.
That's nice.
Like, that's the thing. You mentioned value. Like none of these guys. This is not quite the same. These aren't quite the same assets that Mike Evans was when we got.
That's fair.
We were leaving behind potentially, you're either like looking, hey, do I want a first? Because you could still get a first from Mike Evans when everybody was moving off of him. Or do you risk it and see if he goes for another thou-wow? And he did, right? These guys aren't quite the same. It's not that pivotal point where these guys have a down year. Their value basically is the same. But Mike Evans was a case of like, if he shits the bed, you're not getting a first anymore. So we had to make that decision. We had to make that decision at the time. Like, hey, either you're out now while you still get value, or you're holding and you're just praying. These ones don't quite feel the same.
Okay, that's fair. So then let's jump right to Russell Wilson, because I feel like that has a little bit more juice in terms of how the value shifts or can shift so greatly, right? Like if he has a good season, then that's going to shift in a certain direction. And if he has a terrible season, then it's going to just plummet to pretty much zero, right? And we're looking at him right now, still valued around, a second round pick. We'll say
around Gus Edwards,
but he's
around
Gus Edwards. Like, he could legitimately this seems
Gus
ridiculous.
Russ.
On KTC,
Somebody
in real life, probably not.
Some maniac would probably, do like a Javon Baker plus like a third or something like that. I bet you could make that happen. But how do you guys feel about Russ? I'm still kind of in. I think the situation is pretty good for Russ, and I do think that this is a little, this is out too early. I think he's valued far too low. Do you guys feel the same?
Yeah.
Yes.
Smash.
This one is like kind of like Baker Mayfield when he went to, which is another thing. Mike Evans adjacent, right? Baker Mayfield, he went to a new team, a better team with probably better coaches and everything. Then he's had his whole entire career, and he had a good career. And they repaid him by giving him a 3-year contract, right? So he's still got a little security there. Russell Wilson could do the very same thing. So Russell Wilson could go into Pittsburgh, take him to the playoffs, win 10 games, and then maybe they sign Russell Wilson to another 3-year contract, something like that. And his value will go up a little bit there. So this is one
That's
where
definitely
you need right now, you got to make a decision. Are you going to bet on Russell Wilson with a very competent coaching staff, decent weapons? Are you going to bet on him to have a good career year that's going to earn him another contract? Or is he going to shit the bed and then, it's Justin Fields season? You got to kind of decide that. If you have Russell Wilson,
it's never Justin Fields season again.
You never know, right? So just stranger things have happened.
He's going to be returning kickoffs.
Dude, I'm gonna go get Scott Fishbowl.
Scoring touchdowns, bro. But
that's the secret sauce in Scott Fishbowl.
You don't have a quarterback who returns kicks, you're fucking losing this year.
Yeah, but I think this one fits the bill, and I agree with you guys. I think that getting out on him before the season starts is probably too soon.
Okay, one more in this one, and I actually really think this might be the best one to talk about. Geno Smith. I think this is a really interesting one because I want to know why we hate him in the fantasy community. He's going, per KTC, going below Daniel Jones. Right? He's a 29-year-old quarterback. And I just checked his contract, and I'm like, he must be, in a
he's
contract
34.
year. And his contract, he has like he's 30. I mean, he has a $38 million cap hit in 2025. He ain't going nowhere. Like, he's not going anywhere, I don't think. He would have to have an absolutely horrific year, and I don't think that's going to happen really under Ryan Grubb, kind of what he plans to do. I think it's going to be better than last year, to be honest with you. So this is kind of shocking to me. I think we're absolutely out too early on Geno Smith. There's really no reason, and we've seen plenty of quarterbacks play beyond their 34. He's 33.7, but they're 34-year-old season or year, whatever you want to call it. I don't think that should be the reason we're out on Geno.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Personally, I don't even like the comparison between him and Daniel Jones. I know they're right next to each other, but like from a value wise,
that's the only reason.
No. From a value wise, though, I think like if I can send Javonte Williams for Geno Smith, like I'm going to do that every single day. And I'm looking at players that are much further up. Keenan Allen, like I love Keenan Allen. Sending Keenan in immediately for Geno Smith.
Zach Charbonnet.
Zach Charbonnet, Romeo Dobbs, Jameson Williams. Like I'm going 30 players above Geno.
Do we have the super flex setting off? Like, what is going on? I don't even understand.
I do have the TEP setting off, that's on me. I did have TEP off, but I think it's pretty asinine what you're really seeing happen to Geno's value. I don't know why it's tanked so much. Coming off of really just an injury-riddled season, we don't see a lot of other quarterbacks kind of deal with that and see such a huge tank. And you can say the same thing about Daniel Jones too, right? Not to bring him back up, but 2 years ago finished, I think, top 12 QB points per game, got that contract, and then got injured. It's like, you could say whatever you want. I personally don't think he's very good, but regardless, like it just seems like a weird, like big value hit for both of these guys coming off of major injuries rather than truly like dips in true performance is, I guess, the way that I see it.
I agree with you guys
Yeah.
on Geno. Like, it's something I see play out with the new coach who wants to throw the ball a million times. Geno's pretty efficient, pretty accurate, takes care of the ball fairly well. I just, I think his value is staying kind of where it is, mostly based on, okay, last year they had a couple high draft picks and they did not select a quarterback. They certainly could have. If Penix was available, I think they would have smashed, right? UW guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are worried about that happening again next year. We'll see. It's just one of those weird, like, I mean, even I listen to like Seattle sports radio, and so they talk about this kind of stuff a little bit. I'm just listening for the Mariners, but it's just one of those teams, like, you could look at, we've had enough history with Mahomes and Andy Reid. Like, we know the offense is going to be pretty good, even if the receiver core is not that great. The Bills are going to find a way to like be competitive. The Bengals, Ravens, Cowboys, Eagles, like 49ers, you know what to expect from them. It's teams like the Seahawks. They have no identity. They don't have any top 10 players at any position, ranked by NFL execs. Nothing, right? They don't. Who's the face of the Seattle Seahawks?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Metcalf, or I guess and
Metcalf isn't even top 10, right?
Noah Fant.
So, I saw that tweet.
No,
but yeah, so I think that's where Geno Smith kind of comes in. It's like, hey, woe is me over here in the West Coast, up in the Northwest corner that nobody cares about when it comes to sports. Teams just do it highlighted, just like all the Pac-12 teams, right? So I think Geno kind of takes a hit for that. It's not a national team, and there's not a lot of like star power on that team as far as face of the franchise type of deal. So I think a lot of that gets baked into it, which is not even what we're talking about with the segment, but I believe that explains a little bit of why Geno is valued where he is.
That's fair.
Word salad.
Cool.
It's good context. No, I dig
it. It tasted good.
Thanks. All right. Oh my goodness. All right, so we're out too early. Let's talk about out too late. Just have a couple of things here, kind of flipping it around, right? Like, who should we appropriately get out early on? Like, are these guys that we should be out on, basically? Kind of the opposite, right? We actually mentioned the first one, Keenan Allen. Jake mentioned him. Kind of in the same range, 32 years old, going 133 around like the Kendre Millers, Zach Mosses, Tony Pollards, Josh Downs. Projected to be maybe the 2-3 on his own team. What do you guys think about this?
I try to find someone who thinks that he's going to be the wide receiver 1 on that team, and try to trade with that guy. I love Keenan Allen, but
he'll be the guy in a straitjacket.
Yeah, who's thinking that?
I don't know. I mean, there's got to be somebody out there, right? So I just
in your league of 12.
I don't know. Well, you got 10 leagues. It's
yeah.
I don't know.
So it sounds like you think we should be out on him. Like, we're out of
probably before last year.
Yeah.
But that sounds like hindsight. Like, I don't want to sound like an asshole. It's like, I told you so. Because I certainly didn't say that last year. But I don't think I did.
I don't even know if that's accurate though, right? Like, he was on pace last year to be potentially like wide receiver 3 before the end of season injury. I think his points per game was truly top 5. He finished, I think, as wide receiver 6 total, and he missed 4 games. I hear you, but I don't think last year was really the year to be out on him, but last year was the year to get out of him, if that makes sense. So, yeah, that doesn't make sense. So more so my point is preseason, not the time. In season was the time. And unfortunately, I fucked Billy over and did this in DU3.
God, that was bad.
Because I didn't see the writing on the wall, to be completely honest. This was more so just about my own team build, and I wanted to try and cycle through players a little bit better, and was able to get a first and a third off of Billy, which is ironic because I also traded in the startup of that same league up to get Keenan Allen for, like, I don't know, some garbage.
What's even worse is I have DJ Moore on the same team.
No.
So it just compounded into a really bad situation there.
That's awful.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do
Sometimes
think
it's your
that
own
Keenan.
people.
It's always your own people.
It'd be your own people for sure.
Yeah.
I do think that Keenan Allen though sits in that weird spot where I probably am not willing to get off of him, except for maybe those quarterbacks that we spoke of in that same range. Everything else doesn't seem worth it if I'm still a contender, and so I'm probably keeping him, thinking that he'll probably be wide receiver 2 on this team.
So thinking about his last year and how it was actually a pretty good year, right? And like how now in hindsight, it was probably the time to get out. Like, can we look back at the guys we just talked about, like DeAndre Hopkins, Ridley, like any of those guys, are we misreading that almost in the same way? Or is it because maybe his play style, kind of the way that, he operates, that it's not easy to translate in another offense where he's not the guy? You know what I mean? Is it more contextual at that point?
I do think context is important, but I also think the general valuation in the market is even more important. To your point, why we're talking so much about valuation here is that, Keenan being valued before the season around a first differentiates himself significantly from DeAndre Hopkins, who we're talking about potentially sending an early third for, or Calvin Ridley sending like a mid-second for. Like, I just don't think it's apples to apples in that regard. Whereas Mike Evans was someone that you could potentially value around a first, who's now still currently valued around a first, which is crazy, by the way. While people were selling him for, like an early second, mid-second. I just don't see DeAndre Hopkins cycling back up into that valuation. Now sitting at 32 already. Calvin Ridley, if his valuation goes back up to that point, I would say that's when you sell, because you do want to get out at around that value. But if you acquire him right now for a mid-second and you get his points for first half of the season, try and find another way to get those points on your team is kind of the way I'm looking at it.
Right. Keenan was costing like a first.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I mean, we don't need to talk about the rest of the guys on the list there, because like, honestly, I think that wraps up the conversation nicely. We can hop into the mailbag unless either one of you really wanted to talk about any of the guys that are remaining. Yeah. No,
I'm good.
All right, cool. No, it's just, I felt like that was a really good wrap up of kind of the conversation where I wanted it to go. So let's move on.
All right, mailbag. So we reached out to the Discord members and they did not disappoint. So we have some questions here and we'll do our best.
Uriah just putting up with us. He's like, what am I doing with these clowns? He's like, what the hell is going on here?
Oh, God. Here we go. All right. Let's see here. As a rebuilding team that has prioritized picking up draft capital, are there specific players or player profiles that you would go after now to stash for next year, even if it means using up some of the draft capital you acquired to do so? It seems counterintuitive to me, but I can also see the benefit if you think a player's value is going to rise and there may be a buy window now. So on top of that, what are other managers looking for that you'd want to get ahead of, specific draft capital trades, etc.? So I'll let you guys, do like the heavy lifting here, but just a short answer for me.
This is carry the squad. Let's go.
This is like to me, this seems like the shit I get off the pot type of deal. So, I mean, either you're acquiring picks or you're not. I'm sure it could be done. Like, I mean, this is the strategy that, like, honestly, I think I've been trying to do since I've been playing Dynasty in Console Wars, which has really gotten me to like the 4th or 5th best team in my division for like the last 3 years. Because I don't want to go one way or the other. I feel like using this strategy to try to potentially buy guys that you think are going to rise in price compared to the pick you're sending at the time. Like, if it works out, that's fantastic. And that's going to feel so good. But in reality, I think what's going to happen is you're just going to be middle, and continue to be that middle, which is where nobody wants to be in Dynasty.
No, I love that. I love that. Honestly, that's a great response to that question. Because I was thinking about this in a couple different ways, and you touched on a few of them. But more often when I'm rebuilding, I'm trying to funnel all of the assets possible into high profile elite players that are going to maintain value and attack maybe like younger injured players. Like think of like a Tank Dell of last year, right? So when I thought of this question, I'm assuming that there was kind of like a thought of, are there like some really low value players that you can go get that you can sit on your, on your roster or whatever and hope they build value? And I just feel like more often than not, those lower ranked players are ranked there for a reason, or are in that spot for a reason. And the potential return on the investment is a much smaller margin, right? That's not going to make a big difference if you do hit most of the time, right? Like you're not often going to be stashing a bunch of Pukas all of a sudden like that. It doesn't really work that way. But I mean, when you're in the rebuilding mindset, it does allow you to take on more risks at like those low costs. I get the idea of that, but all like it's always going to be, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I would say probably not. But then when I'm thinking of the type of assets that I'd be looking for, I almost always in my mind, or when I look through, a list, it always goes to the rookies really, which are already, other people are thinking of that. It's not like this is like a unique strategy, right? Because you want those Trey Bensons or all those kind of players. So that's kind of where my head went. But more often than not, I think that we should be piling everything into consolidation and like high-end assets that you can then, work from that core kind of outward, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jake, what you got?
That's what I was going to say. I think you topped it off really well. The whole purpose of rebuilding isn't the idea to acquire a ton of value on Dynasty Daddy with your draft picks and have no value on the rest of your team. The purpose of rebuilding is to truly build your team up to a place where it's competing in ideally 1 to 2 years. It's not to rebuild for the next 6 years and you've just spent, $300 to rebuild and then to maybe compete in year 7. Like that's just not the concept of playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. Maybe it is for some, and it probably is a lot of fun. I will say cycling through rosters does sound like a lot of fun, just not what I'm trying to do. You want to acquire elite assets. Like that's it. Like that's the game. It's super simple. You already know who they are. Everyone else knows who they are. Find their windows of when their value drops. Like it's as simple as that. So to Billy's point, players get injured every year. It's an incredibly dangerous sport that these guys play. Take full advantage of their injury windows. We've seen it with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's value has dropped in certain windows significantly. If you're missing an elite quarterback, that would be someone that you can go get. It's going to happen to another elite quarterback at some point this year. There's guys like Dak Prescott who kind of fall and fade away in certain moments. Tua, he's someone who has fallen, faded. Trevor Lawrence, like you can go through the list of quarterbacks who kind of go through those different waves, and you just need to buy them at the right moment. It doesn't really make sense to necessarily buy them when they're most expensive. And, it's funny that I say that because I have openly bought CJ Stroud probably at his most expensive, but to my own realization or valuation of that situation, I don't think that I necessarily paid premium price for that premium asset. And that's kind of a different conversation. But regardless, that was on a rebuilding team. I think that's really important. So being able to buy a Sam Laporta and a CJ Stroud, even at their premium for unknown assets in those first round picks that I acquired on that rebuild, have put my team in a much better situation than I would be sitting right now, in my own opinion, with, 2 late firsts with like a Xavier Worthy and a Brian Thomas Jr. and maybe a Caleb, versus having CJ Stroud, which I know hit, and Sam Laporta, which I know hit. So it's like, that's kind of the way that I see rebuilding. It's not about trying to be heady and getting Dontavian Wicks for a 3rd and then trying to swap him up for a late 2nd. Like, I'm not trying to do all that shit. I just don't got time, like I just don't have it. So my purpose here when I'm trying to compete in a league.
And he likes Dontavian Wicks.
I fucking love Dontavian Wicks.
But in terms of rebuilding, like he's a player to acquire, but not for the specific reasons we're talking about here.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And if you have other assets you want to throw around there, sure, by all means, someone else potentially values him significantly higher. And so I guess to the secondary point, which is what are other managers looking for that you'd want to get ahead of? I do think it's kind of buzz players like a Dontavian Wicks. I think it's guys like Isaiah Pacheco, a buzz player. I don't think that Pacheco's output is necessarily a negative, but that you can acquire him, especially 12 months ago, at a pretty reasonable cost. Like he was going for a mid-second, and I was able to sell him for basically first-round value within a 3-month window. Like that's amazing return, and that's the type of like asset that I would be looking for personally, knowing that they have a role and hoping that they hit. If they have no role, if they're a Jermaine Burton or an Adonai Mitchell, you're just throwing another fucking dart. And it's like, why do you want to throw that dart? Like it just doesn't make sense to your build, because you can just do it in the draft next year if you really want to do it that badly. So instead, package your picks together and acquire the things that you know are going to hit. And that's kind of the way that I view rebuilding.
Yeah, the easy answer to what do you want to get ahead of that other managers want? Picks. That's always the answer, right? So like picks are an easy one for this, where forget the players at some level, like go after the picks. Like that's always going to be an asset that is going to, return value down the road. But also just going back to the kind of heart of the conversation and like players that you're targeting, like just thinking of two, like a juxtaposition between these kind of two types of players. But like you could go after a Dameon Pierce, right? Because like we've seen him be successful before, and like, yeah, the return on him potentially getting back to where he was is like alluring and possible. You're like, yeah, I can see that happening. But even if he were to do that, like I think the margin again that you're gaining there is pretty small. But I'd be looking more towards even a guy we were talking about today, like, and this isn't even at the elite level like Jake was talking about, which I think is really where you want to be. But if you're looking at players you want to acquire at situations like Rashee Rice or Jordan Addison, these guys who are, again, more injury or off the field issue related, that you can definitely put on your bench, and that they're going to return back, very likely going to return back to the value they once were. And so I think if you're going to be targeting players at all, it's going to be stuff like that, the Tank Dells for injury, all of that, like, because that they're going to be exceptionally valuable once they return, bounce back. So those are the kind of profiles I'd be looking at along with picks.
I got 2 more names just to throw out there to help. I think George Kittle is another one who's just continued to be undervalued. If the Brandon Ayuk trade rumors happen to turn into a trade, George Kittle's role, I think, will continue to grow. And TJ Hawkinson, injured tight end, probably won't play for the first half of the season.
That's a great one.
And you can probably take advantage of that situation. Yes. So just be mindful of that.
Yep.
Every time, Jake, every time. All right. Removing personal bias when targeting players to acquire. Who are some players we don't like personally, but maybe we should be more interested in? For me, at this point, I mean, I haven't looked at the ADP necessarily to back this up, but I think the cost is probably more palatable than it has been in the past. But Christian Watson, I still think that Christian Watson, if healthy, assuming his legs weigh the same now, he could. I love it. Yeah. He could be the wide receiver 1 on that team. It's possible, and I think that with the rise of Wicks, Jaden Reed, Dubs leading that team in touchdowns, and I think yardage last year quietly. I think that maybe those players are players that folks are more interested in right now, and kind of Christian Watson's been forgotten slightly. And I don't think he's that great, but I've seen him put up pretty good numbers in that offense. I believe that he's a guy that I don't like personally, but maybe I should be more interested in. How about you guys?
Go ahead, Jake.
I have 3, and they're kind of in the same group of value. We'll start with Greg Dulcich. I think he's another guy perennially injured, completely undervalued, but there's a weird hive, and they exist only on Twitter, that fucking love that man. Shout out to Paul Patterson. Absolutely loves Greg Dulcich. And thank you for continuing to put out content that tells people that you love Greg Dulcich, because I do think that it is really valuable to be able to acquire someone who is in that, like, late 3rd round range, mid 3rd round range. And you could probably find a way to get a second out of him pretty quickly early in the season. It's not something that I would want to do on a rebuilding team, but if in a contending team and I have a 25-man roster, or 30-man roster, like I probably will throw Greg Dulcich at the end of my bench if I can find him for relatively cheap. Gabe Davis, probably another dude who There's just such a large community that loves that man. I don't personally like him, but I think that the situation in Jacksonville could turn into something positive for him, or it could potentially be the end of his career. It's one or the other. It's kind of crazy, right? You have Evan Ingram, Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk, Parker Washington. There could be no Gabe Davis potentially, but if he does break in and have a role, you're getting him for Bucky Irving. You're getting him for Greg Dulcich right now. So why not kind of shoot your shot if you don't like any of those guys? And then lastly is Kamani Vidal. I think Kamani Vidal has, once again, he has a hive mentality behind him on Twitter. There's a very good chance that he could create a role for himself. Let's say Gus Edwards gets injured and J.K. Dobbins ends up taking the starting role. I bet money the weekend that Gus Edwards gets injured, you could probably sell Kamani Vidal 2x, 3x for whatever he's currently worth right now. And I think that's just kind of the way that I see it. That's truly how I got ahead of Pacheco. It's just like trying to find a Roshan Johnson did that last year. Like, these aren't guys I particularly want anything to do with. It just kind of fit onto my roster to be able to take advantage of when the time is right. And I think those guys have their windows. What about you?
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting conversation because like initially I was thinking more about it like who am I maybe wrong on, right? Which is kind of the same conversation anyway, because it's a similar conversation, right? Because you're still rostering the player, I guess, in this scenario. You know what I mean? But also there's so much value in just having any player because generally somebody likes them more than you do, you know, for the most part. So you can find a suitor. And I really think of Javonte Williams, like with this one, right? Where there is a really big Javonte hive, you know what I mean? And I've never been a Javonte guy, so I've very rarely rostered him, but there's probably plenty of situations where I could have got him like in the rookie draft, you know, pretty cheap, or between then and now where he's really dipped in value, where you could have gotten him knowing that there's a lot of people who just believe this guy is an absolute stud starting running back in this league and they will buy him like that. And so it's one of those things where where I need to remind myself, kind of check myself that first of all, you're not always right. And so there's a range of outcomes where the guy's just better than you think, but rostering them is not a bad thing either way, because there is a lot of value in just having them on your roster and being able to flip them and not have any kind of what's the word, connection to them, you know what I mean, or some reason that where that endowment effect isn't touching you, where like there's a lot of strength in having a player on your team where that's not impacting you. There's no personal bias and you're just like, I can get rid of this guy. So yeah, he's one of those. And another one is Kendre Miller that I often think of. And he's very similar to Javonte in that I don't believe in him. I don't roster him through the rookie drafts, but even with, you know, him not performing or really doing it, I mean, he hasn't even had a chance necessarily to perform. He actually still carries pretty decent value, almost near that Javonte Williams range right now. So it's like those guys are so valuable to have just, you know, bit the bullet on your evaluation and kind of roster them anyway, knowing that there's probably some pretty good exit points for you to get out of them within your leagues. And it's easier for you to do that when you don't have that personal bias connected to them. And that's part of, I think, the equation we don't often think of. And it impacts us more than we think when we're trying to make these trades or when we are trying to get out from under players. And the ones we love, we won't let go of. So anyway, there's some power in that.
It's true. All right, here's one. Should be pretty easy for me. Does the roster limit alter your strategy at all? So like our large rosters, like 30 plus spots, a detriment to the league. Like, does it have an effect on waivers being too thin? It's pretty easy for me to say. I think every league except for the Debbie league I'm in, I believe like all the roster spots and everything, scoring is all pretty much all the same. Might be a little boring, but I like it. I don't want my waiver wire to be full of a bunch of people that, you know, you can start. I want to have like one guy a year, maybe two guys a year that you could like, oh, he's going to add value. Like Dynasty for me, I don't want to deal with waivers. I mean, I don't want to deal with them at all. So large roster size is a plus for me. And do I change my strategy at all? No, because I haven't had to. Just be honest with you. Like I haven't played in any leagues where roster size were smaller than 25.
Yeah. I mean,
and if I did, I don't think I would.
I'll jump in real quick. I mean, I don't think I also have only played, I think, the largest rosters I'm in, other than like a C2C league, which is a whole different situation, is probably 30 roster spots for active roster spots, and then 5 taxi, so 35 spots essentially, and I guess some injured reserve if you if you really want to do that. What do you say, Uriah? I just don't want to do things. Yeah, that's pretty much his answer there. But I mean, I do feel like 25 roster spots is a pretty good balance, where you still get like, a couple of waiver ads that are, players that of that aren't just random players. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I do think that's a decent balance, but I think the deep hunt and like the challenge of trying to find, the Puka, the one guy, there's only like one or maybe none. I think that's kind of like fun, and I enjoy that. So I don't mind it being deeper rosters and it being super thin like that, because I don't really think it creates a poor environment. Like I almost think that potentially it can encourage more activity in terms of trading, right? Where you can't really fix your roster from the waivers and all that. And like, you have to be a little bit more cognizant of your startup draft, of, the trades you're making, your rookie drafts, making sure you have an influx of players coming in on your taxi squad so that you're not relying on other things. So maybe it's just kind of like Uriah said, in a way, like, it's the fun of kind of the hunt in a way. How do you feel about it, Jake?
Yeah, it's interesting because, generally the question really was diving into whether or not large roster size is being harmful to the league economies. And I think that question itself is really weighted in the idea that when we talk about, this like structural element of like how the economy would work through different tiers of players and positions, I do think that larger roster sizes actually kind of thins out the tail end and kind of rises that cream to the very top, what you would expect from, a standard normal bell curve, right? And so for me personally, I do think that there is a lot of interesting notions to try and add different types of leagues with different types of roster sizes, different starting limits or starting positions, different position setups. Like, it helps you to continue to master your own self, understand different scoring elements as well, to be able to adapt to those things, understand the strategy behind it. But I don't think it's inherently negative to have truly a thinned out economy, have an economy where, we are paying a more premium price for players because truly the only way to acquire them would be through acquisition via trade. There's nothing wrong either with being able to send in, a 50% fab post rookie draft and acquire a top end undrafted free agent in your league onto your team. Like, that's kind of the way that I see it. I do see that there's a lot of benefit there, but I don't think that it inherently is negative for the league. I just think it's kind of that own personal nuance that you have to have for those leagues themselves, and understand that the only way to navigate through them truly is through trading. And so, you really better work on your interactional computation rather than just the how am I going to budget my WAB, my fab, etc.
Right. And Tommy actually was Tommy B of the Superflex Super Show. Shout out. He was one of the ones who was kind of talking about this and asking this question. And he was bringing up how, there's only, 260 relevant players essentially in any league. And I think that starts to matter. It matters less for the roster limit, and it matters more for the starting position limits and stuff to me.
Yep.
Right. Because then you got to start thinking about, like, literally, okay, if there's 10 starting spots in a 12-team league, then it's 120 players, that are actually relevant to those starting spots. And then as you increase 11, starting spots, that stuff starts to really impact, how you're drafting because of your needs, obviously. And those things obviously are important. And the larger those get, I do think that actually can negatively impact a league. Like, if you're starting 14 players, like, it gets really hard for any roster to manage that kind of thing. I mean, it just, it's another strategic change, obviously, but I do think that starts to kind of really alter how balanced everything can be. So I do think, somewhere between like 10 and 12 starters is probably where I would keep it and where I think you see best fit for any 12-team league. I don't know. But in terms of roster limits, I don't think it impacts too much for me.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that in my little spiel, but yeah, there's a big difference between starting roster spots and just like overall roster limit. I think, I have the one league that's like start 11, and it just seems like it's always just a little bit harder to put together a roster that I'm happy with every week compared to my start 10 leagues. It's only one extra player. But all right. How are you treating ADP in the Warrior Bowl, Scott Fishbowl? Shout out Scott Fishbowl if you guys are in it. I know you guys are in it. Fun time. It's just really kind of one of the best like drafting experiences you could have out there, except for like it can be really slow. But how are you treating ADP? Are you looking at wins above replacement data, or are there things? Are you going out of your way to try to do anything different with you guys' drafts?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Scott Fishbowl a little bit the past couple of weeks and kind of how we're approaching it. And I think, yeah, definitely need to alter the way you do things, like having too many wide receivers this year in Scott Fishbowl makes no sense because, with how the return yards are scored, like you're going to get a lot more benefit out of going that direction. So you obviously have to do that. But Warrior Bowl is a little bit more interesting and a little bit more like, the scoring wise is a little more interesting, and it's a little bit more like Scott Fishbowl of the past, where they're giving positive and negatives based on completions and incompletions for quarterbacks. Pick sixes get a big negative, and there's a lot of like intricacies to the carry, points per carry, stuff like that, which I really enjoy. Actually, I've been really considering next year when we do our fourth list or fifth listener league, of kind of trying to fix the QB scoring in that way and make it a little bit different. And I think it would be fun trying to kind of draft that way, where the quarterbacks are a little bit more aligned with like how real quarterback play would be. And so the guys who are, heavy on incompletions and pick sixes are actually not super easy to slot into your QB2 spot. So yeah, with Warrior Bowl, I was actually talking to Jake, just talking back and forth kind of about what I was doing with my selections. And he pointed out to me that, Matt Stafford was, just as good as kind of, Tua or something like that, or a guy 2 rounds ahead of him in terms of scoring because of the completions and because of like how those things are impacting the scoring. So yeah, like you really have to key in on that and understand that you can actually fade certain positions a lot further down than you normally would. And so, yeah, definitely with that specific one that was pointed out, I think this might've been Joe's question, but with the QB scoring where it's a bit nerfed like that, and you can really fill it in with more pocket passing quarterbacks towards the end of the draft. Like, yeah, definitely is something I'm doing.
The best thing to do is just kind of use either Josh ADHD's tool over there on fantasylife.com or Adecco's Dynasty Data Lab has ADP where you could kind of sort your team. I don't know if he does it for the Warrior Bowl. I'm not in there. So if you're just kind of worried about ADP and stuff like that, I'm not sure I'd be looking at WAR data. Maybe I should, but honestly, I don't think I've ever gone into one of these big tournaments with like this huge desire to really compete. I really want to put together a strategy that I think is fun, something I believe in. I've mentioned it a few times on Twitter, just like it's one of those situations where you could draft a team and really at the end of it, like no one could roast you because like we don't really know. We just don't. We don't really know. Like every strategy looks pretty good right now. Yeah.
All right. Everybody loves their Scott Fishbowl team. That's for sure. Everybody loves their team coming out of the draft. But I mean, yeah, I go into these not trying to be like, oh, I really want to win this thing, but more, I just think it's like a really fun opportunity to be a tough challenge and see how far you can really push it and get. So I actually do tend to draft these with like a lot of care, I guess, and passion.
Mhm.
Like and I just sit there and I'll think about it probably way longer than I should, and just be like, because I'm just trying to kind of test my mettle, I guess, if that makes sense, against a large group of diverse players that I probably wouldn't always get tested against. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I try to approach it. So I am always trying to take everything into account and do my best, and that's fun for me. That kind of scratches both itches, if that makes sense.
What's interesting about it is just that, like, okay, if you play in your standard 1 PPR league, right? 1.5 tight end premium super flex, and you've been doing it for years, like, there are proven strategies that work better than others because we've had to deal with these exact same settings for years now. Fishbowl changes every year. There's no proven strategy for Scott Fishbowl 14. There's a ton of theory behind it, a lot of takes behind it. There's a lot of math behind what should and couldn't work. Like, I think having 8 wide receivers on your roster is probably not going to work out very well for you. But we don't know that, like, not necessarily. So that's the fun in it. It's just that you can kind of draft like free nilly, even if like you're overthinking it or you're thinking about it a lot, which I'm sure we all do with every selection we make. But you're not making a bad selection at any time. It's kind of crazy that way. So just have fun. Have fun.
That's a very
looking at me crazy,
liberated way to think of that. No, it's a very liberated way to think of it. You're just like very freed. I love it.
You should feel freed, because you can't look at your draft and be like, oh man, I messed up. Like, at least you can't do that today. Not really. You can't be like, oh man, I really took this guy like too early or too late. Like, we don't know. We will know in a few months, but right now, just kind of enjoy it, I guess. All right. Last mailbag question. Another question. Is there value? I like this one. Is there value in trading for quarterbacks in the last year of the contracts? Looking at KTC for valuations, Goff, Mayfield, Rodgers, Minshew, Wilson, and Cousins all saw some type of increase, ranging from minimal to relatively substantial in value when they sign a new contract, regardless of its extension or signing with a new team. Would it be a viable strategy to target quarterbacks like Dak, Tua, Geno, and Love now to immediately trade them after news of the contract breaks, or are you chasing minimal margins to the point that it wouldn't be worth it? If you need a quarterback, yeah. I'm not going to say here and say you should be trying to target these guys. Like, people talk about like the stocks. I'm just going to buy it now, and I could just trade them in a couple months and I'll have profit. That doesn't work very often. Like, unless you're really, really active and really, really good at trading, like, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you don't want to be trying to acquire these guys just for the hopes of trying to sell them. I don't think it works out as well as people tend to think it does. With that, I think Tua got a contract, and yeah, where was it going?
Well, Trevor.
Yeah, no,
Trevor
you're right. They all do, right? Trevor Lawrence, like, he wasn't getting traded. There was no movement with him. He got his contract, and then immediately after that, the most traded person that we saw within our leagues was Trevor Lawrence. Russell Wilson, if he ends up with a 3-year contract after this year in Pittsburgh, he's going to be one of those like players that people are going to go out there and really want to trade for. So I think there absolutely is a good strategy in doing this. The reason why you're doing it is kind of what I would stress here. I wouldn't be trying to acquire these guys because you think, okay, they're going to get a value boost if and when they get a contract. What if they don't get a contract? Is the value boost really enough to roster these guys if you don't really need them? If you need a quarterback, thinking about the fact that they're on the last year of the contract, if they're still a good quarterback, it might be a viable option.
Well, let's say they're playing super flex, and you know, most managers need quarterbacks regardless if they're starting them or not. But
True.
Having some type of, you know, QBX strategy has shown significant signs of success. Does, you know, putting this question in the lens of contending versus rebuilding change kind of your perspective? So let's say I'm a rebuilding team. I'm trying to add a potential value bump to my roster and or fill in a QB void that potentially sits there. So it could be, you know, double fold. Might have 2 value boosts to my team. I'm pushing it closer to contending, and I'm also gaining, you know, quote unquote trade value for it. would that put you in a situation where you're more likely to make a trade like this rather than a contending team where, to your point, you're right, maybe it doesn't have truly any impact to your team in this upcoming season, and you're really just adding depth for the sake of adding depth?
I feel like that is such a situation that you could get yourself really into the weeds with. Because if you're rebuilding, you need whatever moves you make need to be with intent of gaining value. And in this situation, your intent is, hey, I'm going to take Dak because he's going to be sitting out there without a contract for a whole offseason or however long it is, right? And people are going to get a little bit worried. Maybe not with Dak, because like you assume he's going to end up somewhere else, but like Geno. If Geno doesn't get extended by Seattle, he might go the way of Carson Wentz. And then whatever it is that you went out to get Geno, although we realize that Geno right now is fairly cheap to get, you're going to be stuck holding a small bag, but you're not going to see any return on that. And that's going to really hurt a rebuilding team. I'd flip it to the other way, where if you're contending and still want to keep your super flex position strong, maybe you have a guy like maybe you had a guy like Wilson on your team, and you see that Cousins just got this big deal there in Atlanta. Maybe you go out there and get Cousins knowing like, hey, this is a guy that was cheap to acquire, but now he's actually getting backed by his team with a contract. That might be a way for you to like solidify your super flex spots as a contender that are a little more stable, that you know you have a couple more years with. I don't know if I'd flirt with the strategy of rebuilding, me personally, if that makes any sense at all. But I think it's, while it's not a huge gamble, I have Carson Wentz on my bench, and I don't want to see a guy like Geno end up like Carson Wentz. So,
yeah, I mean, I get that part of it, but I almost wonder if we're like galaxy braining it at that point, because
we do.
I mean, Geno's that's fair. But Geno is kind of unique compared to these other guys, where I think it's a little bit more straightforward in terms of understanding that they're definitely going to get that contract, right? There's really not much question about it. And I think it's a lot easier to buy those guys no matter what your situation is if you're playing Superflex, because you really can't have enough QBs in a Superflex league, can you? And I do think it's a really interesting point that our Discord member here pointed out. I forgot who it was exactly, but kind of keying in on the fact that these guys do increase in value almost no matter what level of quarterback they are, when that contract hits or when they sign or hit an extension, that it does increase in value. That's a super, super nuanced little nugget to notice. And I think it's really useful. Yeah. Like this is something that I guess I didn't consciously think about enough, but it makes sense that their value does rise almost, every time in those situations. And I think, like Geno is a little bit, a Geno profile, a Baker Mayfield profile is a little bit, more risky to do that with here for sure. So if the only intent was to buy and sell, I do think that you can get into a little bit of trouble with that. But the majority of the time, I think when you're acquiring these quarterbacks, like, you aren't going to care whether you have to hold the bag or sell, because their value isn't going to go lower when they get the contract. You know what I mean? Most likely it's not going to dip too far unless they just start playing poorly. And I don't think that was part of the evaluation. You know what I mean? If that's part of your evaluation and they're that risky of a player, I mean, that happens sometimes too, if they're just not the guy we thought they were. But in these situations, we've seen them play for quite a bit of time. They're going into that contract year. That they're pretty much up for this contract. And the only reason they're not getting it like a Tua is because they're trying to shortchange him. They're holding money out, whatever it is, that it's going to kind of hit that spike. So I think this is a fairly foolproof strategy, almost no matter what situation you're in. It does matter, obviously, the level of quarterback. That does matter to some extent. But I dig this. I think that there's a lot of opportunity here to kind of key in on this, something that a lot of your league mates might not notice. And at the very least, if you're acquiring the quarterback, I don't think you're going to be upset that you did that, unless your only goal ever is to move them and you don't have any intent of, or they cannot for some reason help you at all on your roster, which just seems kind of like a situation that wouldn't happen that often, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a couple of additional things that I did want to just bring up. I think it's really important to also note that I think looking at Baker Mayfield's is probably a really unfair example because of his own career trajectory, which is the same thing I would say with Geno Smith, in the sense that it's probably not as manageable to be able to predict that. To Billy's point and to Uriah's point, when you think about kind of where and how they acquired those new contracts, right? Like even Geno's new contract that he was able to get, when he got it, it was a pretty unpredictable circumstance prior to that. Baker Mayfield, most were not acquiring Baker even at cost going into conversations of potentially a new contract due to his performances in Cleveland and Carolina. And so I think that's just really kind of nuanced. Same thing with Gardner Minshew. Like, are those minimal value spikes worth it when, we're sitting here with a quarterback who was once a starter in Jacksonville, then became a backup quarterback in Indy, and then became a backup quarterback potentially again now in Las Vegas? Like, it's hard to kind of put all these guys in the same bubble. But to Billy's point, you can definitely differentiate between the group of who is quote unquote, like a top 15, top 18 quarterback versus a bottom 5, 7 quarterback. And if truly this is as viable and foolproof as stated, then it does make a lot of sense to me. I probably have to do a little bit of research behind this myself just to see like when those value peaks are actually occurring. If it's when the contract hits or if it's when performances hit, things like that. I think it's really important. So yeah, the other last bit I would add is, does team matter? Like when a quarterback is signing to a new team, let's say it's not a contract extension or a new contract on the same team, does that kind of impact anything? So for instance, Tua's gone and Dak goes to Miami, and you now know that he has Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. But we'll flip it on its head, and Sean Payton's gone next year. Bo Nix isn't the starting quarterback, and that shitty organization wants another quarterback, and they go out and they get Tua. Does that impact Tua's value?
Yeah, team matters.
Yeah, I mean, it
that
definitely
specific
is
scenario.
Going to. Yeah. That specific scenario. Yeah, I guess you're right.
And this is what I'm saying. Don't even play with fire. Because that could happen. That could happen. Like, I don't want Dak as if he's throwing to Cortland Sutton and Mims in Dallas as much as I want him throwing to CD in Dallas.
I mean, it's so unlikely for something like that to happen. I feel like, I mean, not that specifically, but I feel like you have to, like anything else, like you have to kind of dissect the situation for what it is. Like how, what are the potential range of outcomes? Like, is that even in the cards? Because if it is, then yes, maybe you want to pull back on, like, you don't always know. Obviously, there are times where just like something wild will happen, but I just think it's a lot easier to read the tea leaves in certain situations than others, of course. Jordan Love, like, what, he's going to be on another team? Like, very unlikely. You know what I mean? It's like, of course, there's always the chance that something else happens or the opposite happens. So it's kind of, you're calculating that, obviously, and that's part of the evaluation. And if you're willing to, take that risk on, but I do think that, you probably do need to be like, oh, okay, is this Minshew? Is this Geno? Like, or is this, who was on this list? We could say Jordan Love, but Dak is a good one, right? Like, we know he's awesome. We know that the teams likely want to keep him, or the team likely wants to keep him. We know that he's probably not going to a Denver situation if anybody can help it, So it's like, I feel like you have to break it down that way and kind of understand all the range of outcomes. But I do think that there's some sort of strategy here that can be applied at a situational basis at the very least.
And shout out to Luis Lapasaurus in our Discord.
Yes, Lapasaurus.
Asked the question.
Thank you for the shout. Yeah, I definitely wanted to give him the flowers there real quick. That's a great question. And great research, by the way. I love that. Love putting in some legwork, man. That's how. Listen, that is how you will become a better Dynasty player, though. Being interested like this and like going and digging and finding some stuff out for yourself. honestly, like that is one of the best things you could do to kind of, help your dynasty game, in my opinion, and keep some of these things in the back of your mind. Those little edges matter a lot. So to the final point of his thing is like, are the minimal margins, worth it? I do think to some extent, like those edges are worth it, honestly, and finding those little edges, like that's what it's all about.
All right. Let's get out of here with a couple trades. We have
Josh did us a favor here, right? Gave us a banger.
Banger, yeah. I like this trade.
Was
Josh
it Josh?
Allen.
Oh,
no, I think he just commented on it.
It
I
was,
thought it was
Sam and Gilly. I don't know what Gilly's first name.
Oh
is.
yeah, you're right.
it
It was.
Gilly.
You're right.
Gilly's trying to take Jake's spot at the top there. So we have Josh Allen.
I'll lose again in the finals, I'm sure.
It's my league, but Josh Allen, Keenan Coleman for Jared Goff, Christian McCaffrey, Travis Kelce, Devonta Adams. Now that is a loaded set. So clearly the team acquiring Josh Allen and Keenan Coleman realizes they're probably not going to make it to the ship this year, although half their team is good. CMC, Kelce, Devontae, and Goff. Like they're part of the way there. I would have to look at the full roster, but the trade's a good trade. The person going out there acquiring Goff, CMC, Kelce, and Devonta Adams, they're not really they're playing for points this year, right? If you could draft this in a redraft league, if somehow you're through 4 rounds in a redraft league and your team is coming away with Goff, CMC, Kelce, Devontae, and your opponent has just Josh Allen and Keon Coleman, that's a smash. So if you're looking at it just on a yearly basis, which I'm sure this is 100% the way that this guy's trying to go, the guy who acquired, I think Gilly, who acquired Goff, CMC, Kelce, and Devonta Adams, I think they smashed here. Smash.
Yeah, this is just a good trade. Like I don't know how else to I don't think any side, because like both sides are doing different things really. I mean, Josh Allen you can compete with, but obviously the idea here is to spread it out from having one player who is, the top one player at his position to the potential of having 3 players that on a weekly basis can do that kind of thing, right? And CMC obviously and Kelce almost every week could be the number one at their position. Devonta Adams can flirt with that sometimes, and Goff is gonna maintain a pretty good point per game average to make up for the loss of Josh Allen. And I think he has his I forgot who his other quarterback is, but he does have, I think, a Russian quarterback in there as well. So I think that he's trying to spread the wealth a little bit. So I get it, but obviously CMC, Kelce, and Adams could dip in value greatly between now and next year, right?
Yeah.
So you would definitely rather have Josh Allen, the asset, over, like, he's the best asset in this trade, right? And more often than not, I feel like we end up saying, like, yeah, we want the side with the best asset in the trade. And I don't think that's necessarily true here. I think this is a great trade because both teams are trying to do different things. And I didn't look at the rebuilding team and like how much they've acquired in terms of their rebuilding process and like what they're doing and how many picks they have or whatever. But I do think being able to consolidate down to Josh Allen, if you have some cascading moves in mind or have already done that kind of thing, then it can work out, especially if you're trying to put yourself down to the bottom of the league and still maintain some high-end core roster value. But at the end of the day, I do think the person getting the CMC side is probably winning this deal because they're putting themselves in a really good position to win the league. They probably didn't lose that much value that they can't get out of if they start noticing that they're not winning the league or something for some reason or another. Man, that's a really tough one for me. It really is. I think it's a good trade. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I think it's Josh Allen.
That's what I voted. I mean, that's what I voted in the Discord.
I think it's Josh Allen by a pretty decent margin, honestly. I ran this through my own warp calculator. I think that my marginal winning in one season isn't worth the huge risk I'm taking between CMC, Kelce, and Devonta Adams. Personally, I think all 3 of these guys probably could have been brought up in our earlier segment. Are we out too late?
Yeah.
All 3 of these guys could potentially value plummet this upcoming season. I know it sounds ridiculous, to say that in theory, but it's a true reality. Davante Adams 32, Kelce 34, CMC 28. Yeah. This is territory for a disaster. And me personally, funny enough, got the same offer. Sam was playing the field. He did the same offer to me for Jalen Hurts. And I said no. I knew that it would potentially put me in a better situation for this upcoming season, but my team is incredibly top heavy if I do this, and puts me in a really, really terrible window where trying to find out is really just me selling Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase or Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, yeah, it's a nice luxury to have, but if I lose on any of the windows of CMC, Kelce, and Davante Adams or someone like that, then I'm really putting myself in a pretty shitty situation. So I think all in all, the trade makes sense. Like, shout out to Gilly for doing this. I think it's a huge statement of intent. I think it means a lot to the league too. This is one of those cascading trades that Tommy Blair speaks about all the time. How is this going to impact the market? Does the rest of the league now go after Sam, knowing that he's probably no longer contending this year? Like, it changes the way in which you view the league. And it's really important for leagues to have trades like this because it's going to impact the way in which you view now Gilly's team. It's going to be able to now prevent me from wanting to send him a trade. Like, there's just so many minor caveats to the mentality and the psychology behind trades like this that we have to be really mindful of how wonderful these types of trades are in your league. So when they happen, you should definitely shout those managers out. Like, when Sam sent that to me, I was really honest with him. I told him that this was the better trade for him. I think Josh Allen and Keon Coleman was better than Jalen Hurts and Joe Mixon. It's just a given fact. And so I told him to go the other way. And I told him as well, we're playing in a league for you to learn. Like, I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm here for you to do your best and for you to learn how to play Dynasty. The dude's in his first 6 months of playing. And I think this is exactly how you learn from trades as well. And most importantly, I think he actually, in my opinion, got the better side of the trade long-term in a Dynasty format. It would have been nice for him to potentially get, a first instead of Keon Coleman, something like that. But he might be able to get that in this league anyway. So I
feel like, and it's funny, that kind of throws me off because I don't love Keon Coleman, the asset, but it's going back to the conversation of that personal bias where it's that's a good asset to acquire anyway right now. Like, you can absolutely move him and people think he's going to be the X, and you have him paired with Josh Allen at the very least. So you get that little bonus added. And so, again, I voted for the Josh Allen side. So clearly that's what I think, in a vacuum. When you add context, it always makes things a little hairy. But I actually just went and looked at Gilly's team, and his team's actually thin outside of the starters. So if something were to happen, he does have TJ Hawkinson sitting there as well, which is nice. But even that's not going to help him productivity-wise this year for the most part. So if something were to happen to one of these guys, now not only is the dynasty value gone, but what Jake's talking about, he's not even winning this year either, which is kind of the whole idea of this. So you do always need to calculate what the impact of it not going the way you expect it to go is going to do to your team long term. And Jake's probably right that this can put you in a really, really tough spot. Outside of having Goff, who probably maintains his value no matter what, these other guys can really tank. That's an interesting trade. And also that's something that Jake talking about the cascading effects in the league and all of that is so important. And I think subconsciously we probably know that happens, but keeping it on the front of your mind, you can do a lot of things with that. So I'll probably go dive back into that league and think a little bit more about what happened and how I can
send out some
maybe
some
work
offers.
off of it. Maybe work off of it. Okay. All right. We got one last trade here before we get out of here. I know your eyes shut the fuck up, guys. I'm ready to go.
This is the off season. We're doing 90-minute episodes. What the fuck?
You guys are great. I appreciate it.
I love you guys, but I also don't need to see an hour and a half of you. Okay. All right. So we have one more. Here's the final one.
All right. So this one actually almost broke the league because one of the guys got really, really butthurt about it.
I forgot about that.
This is from Legends, the Florida League.
California, yeah. It would be way more chill if it was the California League.
Yeah,
but
we're hot as shit down here and pissed. Yeah, we're hot and pissed.
It's the humidity.
Yeah.
All the humidity just fucking with everyone's heads. Got it.
All right, so Tyreek Hill, which is a good asset to have, but I didn't think it warranted this response. But Tyreek Hill for Terry McLaurin, Hollywood Brown, and Sam. It's fine. Like, I understand that Tyreek Hill's like the best player there. And Sam Darnold probably, actually, we don't really know. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with this year. But he's probably not going to play the whole season. They just drafted JJ pretty highly. But it's not terrible. I mean, Tyreek Hill's old too. He's probably a guy that has like 1 year left, right? So you have 2 flexible wide receiver 2s and a starting quarterback for part of the year for Tyreek Hill, who hopefully stays healthy and doesn't lose value or retire after this year. It's not that crazy. This would be super crazy like a year ago, right? But to me, this year doesn't even seem that bad. I think it's okay. Or am I nuts?
It's a bad trade.
Like I'm nuts.
No, like I do think it's a bad trade. In all honesty, I do think it's pretty easily Tyreek.
Sure.
But to your point, it's not league breaking. It's not collusion. It's not any of the C words. You know, there's no cheating. I won't say the other C word that I was about to say because it's not approved for the air. But you know, the reality is exactly. The reality is that this trade just didn't make sense. Like, I don't know if anyone saw and looked at the rosters that made this trade, but the trade just didn't make sense for anybody. And it's the weirdest thing. That is probably the part that kind of baffles my mind the most, is it doesn't fit either team's build to go this direction. And it really just kind of makes you think about like, what is and why are these two teams trying to make a deal like this? You know, it's early in the offseason. We're just coming off of the startup and a lot of things can change. But I think the reality is the team that's acquiring Tyreek Hill is not competing this year, no matter what they want to believe in themselves. But if you acquire Tyreek Hill at this price, though,
Jake's got some news for you, all right?
As someone who is owning your 25 first,
maybe you're not competing.
Maybe I'm just biased. But I do think that the reality is that if you're acquiring at this price, it's totally fine. Like I did this in another league where I wasn't necessarily competing on Christian McCaffrey early in the year. I think I sent like a late first. There's a late first and David Montgomery for Christian McCaffrey. And that felt like a pretty easy smash. Package Christian McCaffrey and then got Justin Jefferson. It's like, you know, if you're able to do things like that, then your team that doesn't look like it's competing this year, that's fine. You're properly acquiring talent that you can properly flip. But if you think that you're competing, you know, going back to that last trade, I just don't think that trades like this make sense unless you're seeing the whole picture. That's kind of the whole idea behind Dynasty, is not trying to think so single step. It's trying to think multiple steps ahead so that you're not setting yourself up for failure come December and you're sitting there and you're like, shit, I have no firsts anymore for the next 3 years. I know Uriah loves that. 27 firsts. You have no first for the next 3 years and you're just like, what am I doing with this team? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So that's kind of my initial thought when I saw this trade. It was just like, wow, that's a little lopsided. Oh, wow, this trade makes no sense for either team, because the team that had Tyreek, I thought was probably a contender this year. And I don't think that they necessarily, I think they devalued their team pretty significantly. So yeah, what are your thoughts, Billy?
No, yeah, their team actually isn't even bad. They, like you said, they have a pretty good contender squad. And I mean, like you're talking about, nobody's going to turn value down. Like if it's a good trade for Tyreek Hill and you don't need him, like you could still trade for him and try to flip him and hope that you can get more for that one asset than the others. Right. And, you know, I always think of this, like the phrase, like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes dynasty managers think the other way. Like the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. Like, oh, now I have a McLaurin and a Hollywood who could score maybe similar points to Tyreek. And now I have two of them plus a potential starting quarterback. And like, that's how you make this work in your head. And also I think that this league has been a little bit quiet. And I think that one of these managers at the very least just wanted to trade. And I think that's what happens sometimes too, is like some people just want to trade and end up doing things that are not beneficial for their teams. And we talk about it all. I talk about it all the time. How like you should only be trading for a purpose, and for the purpose of improving your roster, and that solely being the only reason you ever even thought of concocting this trade. It should never be that you just wanted to trade, because that's going to end up going down a path like this, where you end up making a trade you probably shouldn't have. But yeah. So I mean, I think the Tyreek Hill side for sure. I don't like. Okay, so. You said the guy who got Tyreek Hill doesn't have their first. Like, do you think that they could have gotten a first for either McLaurin or Hollywood alone ever? Like, it's potential, right? Like, I'm wondering if the idea was, I can just get Tyreek Hill and get my first back eventually, like in point scoring season, like a first plus a second or something. But I just wonder if you could have done the same thing with the assets you already had, maybe, and just waited. If you're them, but I guess you could do that maybe easier in your head with Tyreek Hill. I'm just trying to come up with kind of a reason for this trade, and also just think about these other two assets in terms of like the player acquiring McLaurin and Hollywood. Like, could they maybe get more than they could have just for Hill alone down the road? I don't know, like what the idea is. I don't hate McLaurin or Hollywood that much though. Like, I don't hate those players that much either. Like, I think they're fine. I don't know.
No, it's fair. I think that's actually a really great question. And if you break down the trade and things go as well as they can this year for all three of those players, you very well could be looking at 3 firsts for Tyreek Hill, and you're not going to get 3 firsts for Tyreek Hill ever. So by all means, they're all late firsts, realistically. Even Sam Darnold, if he starts off the year incredibly, whatever.
Yeah, it's a pipe dream, but I see what you're saying.
But yeah. It's an absolute pipe dream. I'm saying
it's possible for sure. 2 firsts are possible out of that side, which is probably more than you're ever going to get for Tyreek Hill. Even like, I don't know if you're getting 2 firsts for Tyreek Hill. Like, so like, I kind of see like the idea of that side. It's definitely more work to get that done, and also you have to hope that things work out, right? Like Hollywood would have to be really great this year, pretty consistent, weekly guy, and McLaurin should be pretty good. I mean, he should demand somewhere near a first anyway for the kind of player he is. So I could see it happening, but yeah, this trade actually set off like an absolute shit show of drama from like literally one league mate who doesn't quite understand, I guess, how this works. But yeah, they essentially were like, I'm leaving this league if this doesn't get turned around. And I was like, we're not doing that. So I guess decide whether you want to be in this league or not. And we quickly moved on from that. So actually, I think that worked out really well, and that was a great outcome from how that happened. Pushed that trade through, called it a day, and we'll let these managers reap what they sow, whatever that may be. And that's all I got. Right. That's all I got for that.
Anything else you guys want to talk about?
No, that was a lot of fun. Big shout out to our Discord members. I do want to say that for the questions, like they're always awesome. Really appreciate you guys listening in. Really appreciate you guys being part of the show. It makes it all that much better. So yeah, go like, subscribe on YouTube, and apparently we're not on Twitter anymore, so that's where you're gonna have to catch us. Peace out.
Have a good night.
Later.